Horses sweat, men perspire, ladies merely glow. Just one of the various bits of old timey culture that I learned growing up in Britain. Um, Welcome back to the Black Pill. Let's hit gender. Okay, gender is the set of roles and expectations that we put on people based on our assessment of their sex. That's increasingly a weird way to do business, but for probably evolutionary and biological reasons, that's how it's been done for virtually all of human history. Is that moral? You got me on that one. Got me on that one. Um, so there are men and there are women. There are ladies and there are gentlemen. Uh, so far, so far, third or fourth genders haven't really caught on in the United States. We're kind of so backwards, so retrograde. I don't see that happening, at least not very soon. We just got same-sex marriage a few years ago. The backlash to that has been absolutely brutal. Any more forward progress is against a very strong headwind. Third and fourth genders have existed. Some of them, some countries still recognize other genders than male or female. At this point in the conversation, someone usually brings up Native American culture. I'm going to counsel you against that right now, unless you can name the tribe at the historical time period. What's going on here is called Outgroup Homogeneity, and it's on the scale of racism. It's the idea that all people of a given outgroup are the same, and Native American culture is that's a very difficult thing to talk about because at the time Columbus landed somewhere in the New World, there were literally thousands of Native American cultures, some relatively unified, some relatively diversified. Very different cultural practices from place to place, and hundreds of different languages. So to say Native Americans and third gender, it's on that racist continuum. But there are places on Earth right now that do third gender. There are places who do third and fourth gender. Go find them; they're fun. I'm not going to talk about them here. Um, Not really very relevant to the conversation, and I don't want to exoticize anybody right now. So masculinity and femininity, they are what we want them to be. Remember the word reification from the intro video. Reification is when you treat ideas as though they were things. So we're both laying on our backs, looking at the clouds on a sunny day, which it isn't right now, it's very gray. But imagine it's a sunny day and we're laying on our backs smoking doobies or something. And I see a cloud and I go, that cloud is a rabbit. And you look at the same cloud and go, oh, it looks like a duck to me. And I go, nope, it is a rabbit. And you go, well, I can see how you would think it would look like a rabbit. And I go, no, it is literally a rabbit. I am reifying that cloud. There's nothing there. There's neither a rabbit nor a frog nor anything else. It's water vapor in the sky presenting an ambiguous stimulus that we could interpret in any way we wanted. And so it goes with gender. Masculine and feminine, they're not the only two possibilities. And they're not opposite, they're mostly alike. And it could be whatever we want them to be. They could be whatever we want them to be. We can both look at the phenomena and see different things. Where we get in trouble is insisting that my interpretation is the only possible interpretation. To be masculine in Japan might mean something very, very different than to be masculine in America. Japanese folks, when they interact with American men, tend to find that we lack empathy, that we're loud, boorish, have bad manners. Not very masculine at all. In fact, we're quite childlike and selfish. Masculinity, being manhood, would have to, for the Japanese, not be childish. You'd have to grow up. From time, from place to place, masculinity changes. From time to time, it also changes. So, that idea that men don't sweat, men lightly perspire, and women glow, it's about the avoidance of hard work. That men are not beasts of burden, the masculine man employs beasts and thinks through problems with his mind. I'm getting into a book called Men's Lives. It's a collection of essays about men from feminist perspectives in the 1990s. And I don't remember the specific authors at this point. I'll try to remember to link it for you. But one of the ideas is masculinity in America has changed over time. And one of the driving forces of that change is the American Revolutionary War. Before the revolution, Americans were English. I mean, there were a lot of different foundings, okay? And there were Spanish cowboys in Florida, and there were French. I don't know what the French were doing, but they were doing it in Louisiana, and there were more Spanish people on the West Coast, and a bunch of Dutch folks, Germans. It was very complicated. It was very complicated. But there was this ethos that landowning English people were the real men, at least as far as the landowning English people were concerned. And so masculinity would be something that landowning English men had and other people didn't have. So it would mean to be educated in the right places, at the right schools. It would mean to know English, church Latin, probably Greek, and probably at least one or two other European languages. That would be very masculine. It would mean wearing perfume because we weren't into showering at the time. And so the right scent to cover up your body odor on your neck, that would be quite masculine. Wearing the right lace, having lace at your collars and cuffs. The more expensive the lace, the more masculine you were. In this time and place, power concentrates in money. Money is power, and power is masculine. And so having money to be able to show ostentatious wealth on one's person, that would be quite manly. The best wig. In a time of cowpox and then smallpox, people would have scars on their scalps, and wherever there's a scar, your hair can't grow. And so people would have thin, patchy, unsettling, upsetting hair, should be covered up with a wig. This is where we get the term bigwig, because the richest man could afford the finest, largest powdered wig, and that was terribly macho. What else? Hats. The bigger your hat, the larger and more ostentatious the random buckle on the front of your hat. That's manliness. And a manly man would be offended by bad smells. Ooh, how awful. And think of Malfoy's dad in Harry Potter going to Hagrid's house, and Hagrid yells at him, "Get out of my house!" And he goes, "I take absolutely no pleasure in being in your. You call this a house?" Right? He's terribly offended by Hagrid's place. It lacks class. It is animalistic, not manly, not masculine. Masculine here is set apart from the animal domains. The masculine man would avoid hard work. Hard work is the province of animals or lesser sorts of men who can't buy out of the work. Manliness is knowing a lot of poetry, being able to cite the classics, and honestly, perhaps writing a bit of poetry, some sonnets for your potential lovers. Why did that change? Well, in war, it's actually quite difficult to get people to murder other people. I know, man, I know. You watch the television news at night and you think that people are all too willing to murder each other for a cause or for no cause. But honestly, the local news, if they can't find a crime in your local area, they'll go to the next largest municipality. And if they can't find it locally, they'll search the state. And if they can't find the state, they'll find it nationally. The news puts in front of you the worst things happening in America. There's like 250,000 schools in America. When somebody shoots up one school, 249,999 other schools, nobody shot anybody. It was fine. It was fine. Right? So you get this sort of biased view of how violent the world is and how violent people are. It's actually quite difficult to get people to shoot each other. So what you need to do is create pseudo kinship bonds. So we're going to go to basic training. We're going to shave everybody's head, put them in identical clothing, teach them how to walk in a straight line. Uh, we're going to teach you how to walk, talk, shoot, shit like a U.S. soldier. De-identify everybody, get them working together against a common threat, the drill instructor or the TI, if you're not in the Army, training instructor in the Air Force, and tell them stories, war stories, and get them to see one another as brothers, and then find some enemy to outgroup. So think of all the disgusting epithets that soldiers have used for the foreigners we intend them to kill. All right. And at the time of the Revolutionary War, who we needed to kill was the British. And what better way at that time to dehumanize them? At a time when all men are created equal, but Africans are slaves and women are subhuman? What better way than to feminize the English? And so all of the things that the English would have considered masculine, knowing poetry, being clever, avoiding hard work, those things became feminized because it just is so easy for men to want to kill women. And so no more like backing out of doorways bowing like so in florid gestures, and no more fancy language. We created our own version of masculinity, and in that version, to be manly is to make things with your own hands. It's artisanship. So American masculinity becomes overbuilt, strong, self-reliant, artisanal, ignorant. It's ignorant. It's manly to be ignorant here. Someone who reads too many books is a little bit girly in America. Okay, the Korean War. When we sent soldiers to the Korean Peninsula, we sent a ton of Christians. And the South Koreans really looked up to, in many ways, looked up to the American soldiers and took on their Christianity. But they also started to take on American capitalism. So if you get a chance to watch Train to Busan, a Korean zombie film, it very much is about the new class structures imposed by adopting capitalism way too fast and thoughtlessly. And there's a zombie movie happening at the same time. But American masculinity, of being strong and self-reliant and studly and massive. They really, really adopted that, adopted it hardcore, wrapped it into their version of Christianity that they created. So right here, you should see a picture I stole from the internet of a South Korean Jesus. Look at this Jesus. Jesus Christ, look at this Jesus. Oh my God. Uh, yeah, there's a whole story. There's a whole story in there, isn't there? Um, and look how much Korean Jesus looks like Republican Jesus. Anyway, so there's that. A few years ago, I saw this TED talk, and I'll link it. Terrible with names. I'll link it. It's just a fellow talking about kind of being black in America. He's a grandfather. One of his grandchildren is white, and one day his white grandchild says to him, "Grandpa, am I white?" And he really has to spend some time thinking about how to answer the question. As a black grandfather, how do you talk to your like 5 year old white grandson about this? The TLDR on this whole talk ultimately is we used to think that race was real and didn't matter. Mm-hmm. And now we think race is not real but does matter. In other words, race is not a useful biological construct, but it's a sociological construct, and the way people perceive your race has implications for how you're able to live your life, what business you're able to get done, how people are going to treat you. And it's useful to think of gender in the same way. All right? That sex is more or less real. Sex is more or less real. Gender is an abstraction. We made it up. We get to decide what gender is like. And it matters how people perceive your gender, how people perceive how well you conform to the gender expectations of the time and place in which you live. Those things matter. So think of Hillary Clinton debating Donald Trump in mid 2016. In America, we type men as agentic and we type women as communal. So to be agentic means to act into a space, to have one's own will, to act into a space, to dominate conversations, talk over people, have opinions, not change your mind. Um, to be communal, though, is the opposite of those things. It's to put other people's needs first. It's to make sure everyone's fed. It's to be a peacekeeper. It's to laugh even when the joke isn't funny, just to smooth the wheels and get along. And when men act to type, they're rewarded. When men act against type, right, a communal man might tend to be punished in the environment. And a woman acting agentic would tend to be punished, and communal would tend to be rewarded. Well, what expectations do we have for a president? In America, we don't have a history of female leadership. So we have stereotyped the position of president as a masculine, agentic position. What we seem to want is a man who will talk over all the other world leaders, who will dominate other countries in the world, who will dominate the House of Representatives. And when candidates get to the debate hall, that's what they do. They talk over the other candidate. They're very insistent. They might use some dodgy language. They're pushy. They don't change their minds. They control the conversation. And that's playing to type. People tend to reward those performances. But when a woman does it, when Hillary Clinton does it, we have special words in America for women who act agentically, and they tend to start with B and rhyme with itch. Going against type, it's a double whammy. It is it's the double bind. It's the no-win scenario. All right, Hillary debating Donald, she can either be as agentic as him, as tough-minded and bullying and domineering as him, and therefore go against type and be perceived in an itchy way. Or she can go according to type and be communal and peacemaking, which means Donald Trump gets all of the time to talk. And she's not perceived as a leader, as not having the attributes that we might want in a president. That's the double bind. So ultimately, the standards of masculinity and femininity are not really meetable. They're not realistic standards, you know? Maybe growing up, my role model could have been Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I confess that for about 15 minutes in 1987, Schwarzenegger was my role model. Terrible, terrible role model. But I admit it. But that's not a reachable standard, you know? In 1987, I would have been 13 or so, and there's no way that I was ever going to be 6'2" and 225 pounds of prime Austrian beef. I didn't have access to steroids or weights to lift, and even if I had a professional gym, I had no idea what I was doing in there. Right? It's not a realistic standard. It can't be met. Women's standards. It used to be that being young and thin and pretty was enough. But now women are expected to be both fit and thin. And I'm here to tell you that you can't eat enough to work out and be properly skinny at the same time. And when you're looking at women on Instagram, they're photoshopped anyway. They're literally unmeetable standards, and I guess you've probably heard enough about Barbie, right? So these would be the extremes of winning masculinity and winning femininity. To win femininity, dude, masculinity is fragile. And so there could be several different ways actually of being feminine, and that's why I'm hanging out on the masculine side so much. Today we talk a lot about toxic masculinity. In the heady days of the 1990s, we talked about hegemonic masculinity. That's too hard a word for most people. Hegemony is too hard a word for most people. But when you look at Russia's actions in the Ukraine, they insist that Russia is the Ukraine, that Ukraine is Russia. Ukraine is not its own country with its own language and its own history and its own traditions. It has always been part of Russia, according to the Russians. That's hegemony. That instead of there being two things, two peacefully coexisting neighbors, there will be one thing. There will be Russia. And then everyone eventually will speak Russian. We used to say Kiev. News reporters used to say Kiev, and now they say Kyiv. And I got curious about that. Like, is this a mistake suddenly everyone is making? No, Kiev is the Russian pronunciation of the name of their capital city. Kyiv is the Ukrainian pronunciation. And when they threw the bums out, when they decided to be a democratic country and have leaders who aren't just Russian puppets, they decided that they would pronounce the name in a Ukrainian rather than a Russian way. Right? This is anti-hegemony. So toxic masculinity and hegemonic masculinity, there isn't a lot of daylight between those concepts. In hegemonic masculinity, what we're saying is we've decided there's one way to be masculine, and everything else departing from that is somehow failing at masculinity. It would require a lot of overcompensation. So go back to the beginning about continua and spectra. In the beginning, there is one thing, and that thing is man. Man is straight, and it goes without saying, because that's the only legitimate way to be. And man is cisgender, because that word hasn't even been invented yet. There is no transness. And women deviate from manhood and therefore are inferior. So you start defining womanhood as being small and slender and supplicant and tender, and you start defining man as the opposite because being seen as a woman would be dangerous. And so man is strong and unavailable, emotionally unavailable and stoic and cut from granite and physically strong and never complains. All right. And then there's only that one way to do it. Any dimensions along which you vary from that central hegemonic definition of masculinity puts you at risk of losing your man card and being treated like a woman. So when we hear white social and political commentators saying pretty soon, white men, you will be a minority majority. You'll be a minority in your own country. Ooh, there's some assumptions there. There's some assumptions there. Like black and brown people aren't Americans or aren't real Americans. And that being a minority is bad. All right. And the same, being feminized, men know that being feminized is bad because of the way we treat women. We don't want to be treated that way. So the toxic element comes in. Toxic masculinity is this old timey way of being masculine that's very domineering and self centered and immature. It's not good for other people. It's kind of narcissistic. It's not good for other people. It doesn't give other people space and freedom to be who they are. It's not very nurturing, but it's also bad for us. The toxic elements of masculinity are toxic to the men trying to meet those models of masculinity. Schwarzenegger has had a couple of open heart surgeries, and his testicles are like that big because of the steroids. He used all those steroids to overcome his own feelings of smallness when he was a child. He got that big so he wouldn't have to feel small. That's pretty toxic. The bodybuilding circuit, the elder bodybuilders who were active in the 70s and early 80s, they pretty much all have these medical problems that were induced by using steroids to be the biggest man in the room. Just think of all the ways, gentlemen, think of all the ways that we try to be the biggest man in the room when it's really impossible and ultimately pointless to do that, that ultimately harm us, that damage us, that curtail us from our emotional lives. Okay. So gender changes. It changes from time to time and place to place. So a man and a woman in middle America in 2022 might not really recognize the masculinity or femininity of the local tribes that they displaced from the 17 and 1800s. And if you go to Japan or China or Indonesia or Kenya, you're going to find people enacting masculine and feminine norms in ways you're not very familiar with. So here's my challenge for you. Just spend some time right now and think about all the ways that if you are cis male, you're actually not that masculine. And if you're a cis female, all of the ways you're actually not that feminine. Yeah, think about that for a while. For myself, I know that I'm supposed to like cars. I'm supposed to be good with my hands and fix things and be mechanically minded, but I'm just wired backwards. And so when I try and fix things, I always fix them backwards. Literally, always. I put the things together backwards and I have to take it apart and start over. It's very frustrating. And so I can understand mechanical things abstractly and physically I can't. And so I'm not interested in doing it. I was shopping for a car a couple years ago, and the salesperson wants me to test drive it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not super comfortable driving a strange car. Go on the highway. Ooh, I don't know if I want to do that. And we do it anyway. We pull over. We go in this empty lot, and she has me get out and look under the hood. And I'm like, there could be anything under there. There could be French existentialists smoking filterless cigarettes and complaining that life is pointless. I don't know what's in there. There could be a hamster. There could be a sewing machine. She's talking about features on the engine, and I'm just nodding and going, yep, yeah, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I don't care about any of that. What do I look like? I know about sports. I was always excluded from sports. Traveling back and forth from country to country and nobody teaching me how to play the games, just assuming everyone would know. I really lost interest. And sports in England is very violent, it's sadistic even. I'm quite large now. I know you can't tell. There's not like a height chart like I'm leaving the 7-Eleven, right? But like the 6'2" line is right there, you know what I mean? So I'm quite large now, but in school I was usually the smallest boy in a given class. And then one year uh, for rugby, which we play in the sleet, in the mud, they took the biggest boys and make a team out of them, and took the smallest boys and made a team out of us, and literally just had the big boys crush the crap out of the small boys for an hour and a half. That's how sports is in my country. If you're not up for that, I mean, I opted out into cross country running as soon as I could. Um, I'm just not that masculine. Like my favorite thing to do is get together with my buddy and edit poetry books and cry. Like that is it. Learning to cry was the best thing I ever did for myself, man. Learning to cry, to grieve my father, to grieve the loss of my nationality. Yeah, that's the best thing I ever did for myself. Refusing to express any sadness or care is absolutely toxic. And what good is it? What good is it? Like how far up the pole do you think you can rise by pretending to be hyper masculine? And what is it costing you? And ladies, from your end, what are you getting out of those performances of femininity? And what are you getting out of letting those go? So the gender landscape is pretty complicated. Maybe some people tuned in expecting an explanation of the current terms and so forth, the nomenclature. I'm not really up for that. I'm not really up for that in specific granular detail. Let's do the best we can in a couple of minutes. So some people would say they were agender, which means when they sit on the chair and think about themselves, they don't really feel masculine. They don't really feel feminine. They're not up for performing roles that they don't feel. And so, if it's safe to do so, they'll just wear whatever they want to wear on a given day and present however they want to present on a given day. Wear the clothes you like instead of the clothes that are appropriate to the gender you've been assigned, and take on the roles that are appropriate to the moment. So if the person is biologically male, but they feel like expressing care, well, they don't feel very male or female in particular. And when care needs to be expressed, let's express it, right? So that's an external definition or description of agender from someone who's not. Take that for what it's worth. I really advise you to go find some agender people and ask what their experiences of gender are. Someone might be gender flexible. That is, some days they feel masculine and some days they feel feminine. And that might not be very masculine and very feminine, but just enough that today they're going to dress in clothing appropriate to women, and today they're going to dress in clothing appropriate to men. They're going to present and act and take the roles accordingly. Today I feel masculine, so I'm going to talk over all my coworkers. No, people who who have explored the ideas of gender and are willing to step outside rarely actually enact the more toxic forms of gender in public. Oh, it does happen. It does happen. It's just not all that common. And then some people might come from a place where there are recognized third genders. You can try and create your own gender from scratch, but gender is external expectations, right? You don't have a gender. We impose a gender upon you. And so there would have to be some script for how to act out a third or fourth uh, way of doing a gender. In the earlier days of Facebook, you could pick from 50 different gender descriptors for your profile. And the comedians, of course, made mincemeat of that practice. And I'm going to spend a bunch of time describing a bunch of different ways of doing gender. It's ultimately pointless. I'm not coming out of any of those ways of doing gender in particular, and they change all the time. They change all the time. I don't think it's on purpose, but I like to look at that rate of change as speed bumps. Speed bumps. Meaning we stereotype people. Okay. So if I think you are a man, then I'm coming at you with a bunch of expectations about what men are like. I believe I know something about you because I think you're a man and you agree. All right, well, now we start doing different labels. And instead of saying I am a man, I say I'm a boy, B O I. And then when I know what a boy is, B O I boy, then when someone says I'm a boy, I go with an I and you go, yeah. And then again, I have all these expectations. All right, now I've mastered interacting with this kind of identity, going to put that on other people, and it just becomes a new stereotype. By always having new descriptive language for ourselves, it is perhaps functionally a way of saying, you don't know me. You don't know me. I am a crypto boy. What does that mean? You're into cryptocurrency? No, no. Crypto with a K. Oh, what does that mean? And then I get to tell you how I feel and enact my gender into the world instead of you assuming it. So we have a certain rate of change in language, and even if I had a current list of all the gender terms, reciting it to you would do you no good because in a year or two it'd be obsolete anyway. That's what I have for the moment on gender, and I'm going to come back at you with sexuality probably in a couple days.